The Devils might make a big move come the off season, but who do you put on the trade block? And also, let's talk about the possibility of four nations returning. Gary Bettman has said that the NHL might change its course of action after the success of Four Nations last month. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here at the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Chalky Play Announcer, Devils Wire Pucks Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. What's on the agenda for today's episode? Well, in the first segment, we're going to talk about the possibility of the New Jersey Devils moving on from Dougie Hamilton. Now, hang on. Put down your pitchforks. Don't come at me on social media. Hear me out. I will explain why I'm talking about it momentarily. Let me just continue with the rundown of today's show. After the first segment, we will talk about the Devils' mindset heading into their next matchup against the Calgary Flames. I will play a soundbite from head coach Sheldon Keefe at a recent Devils practice. And then in the third and final segment, the NHL is not committed to do an all-star game in 2026. Right now, it's anticipated that they will do an all-star game at UBS Arena. And obviously in 2026, that's the Winter Olympics, and the NHL will have a lot of their players represent their respective countries during the big event. But Gary Bettman came out and said that the NHL might change their course of action given the success of Four Nations. You guys already know my thoughts on Four Nations. I thought the NHL did a phenomenal job hosting the event in both Boston and Montreal. And I said that the NHL struck gold and that they should really consider bringing it back at some point in the future. But I'll talk about that to close out today's episode. All right, back to the biggest talking point. Should the Devils move on from Dougie Hamilton? Now, you're probably asking yourself, why Dougie Hamilton? Why am I talking about it? Well, I was on the internet and I came across a clip on X, and basically it was this show talking about the possibility of the Devils moving on from Dougie Hamilton come the offseason, because some people have been disappointed with Dougie Hamilton's defensive effort, and not to mention, it seems like he gets hurt frequently. Like his first year with the Devils, that was cut short due to injury. Last year, he missed 75% of the season. And this year, his season was cut short yet again because Tom Fitzgerald revealed on a Canucks and Kraken sanctioned podcast of all platforms that Dougie Hamilton is slated to miss the rest of the season, and that if he were to return, it wouldn't be until the second round of the playoffs. But digressing a little bit, I was just pondering, should I talk about it? Should I entertain the thought of trading away Dougie Hamilton? Well, let me provide some background information before I give my opinion. Let's look at some of the numbers for Dougie Hamilton. I talked about it in a prior episode, but let me refresh your memory. In 63 games played this season, Dougie Hamilton had 9 goals, which was 9th on the team at the time, 31 assists, 3rd on the team, 40 points, 5th on the team, 5 power play goals, 4th on the team, 10 power play assists, 4th on the team, giving him a grand total of 15 power play points. So almost half of his points came via the man advantage. And I'm going to circle back to that because that is crucial. 81 blocks, 5th on the team. He was 5th on the team in takeaways. And yes, his defense is not really all that good. Expected goals against, he had a rating of 45.1, which was second on the team, just below Brendan Dillon, and that was his defensive partner. And on the flip side of that, he does create offense. Expected goals for, a rating of 49.8, which was second on the team, just below Jack Hughes. So those are what the numbers look like for Dougie. The big thing that I want to highlight about Hamilton and his overall game is that, yes, his defense is not good. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are times in which he does put the Devils into vulnerable positions, and he's not really the fastest of skaters, but his offense is elite. I will die on this hill and say that he has one of the best slap shots in the entire NHL. He creates offense, and he's a huge catalyst on the power play. He's one of the reasons why the Devils' power play is so successful. If you don't believe me, look back at last year. The Devils had one of the top power play units in the entire NHL. But when Dougie went down with his injury, that number went down severely to the point where the Devils couldn't generate anything on the power play. I get it. Dougie Hamilton's not the sole reason why it went down, but I think it's safe to say that he was an integral part of it because he creates that offense and he gets pucks to the net. And speaking of last year, I think the whole narrative that the Devils are better without Dougie Hamilton really should have been put to bed at the conclusion of last season, because the Devils didn't improve defensively when Dougie went down with his injury. If anything, they got worse. So yes, Dougie is not the best defensive-minded defenseman, but it's not like the Devils get severely better when he's not out there. And it's one of the reasons why I don't have the Devils making it past the first round if and when they clinch a playoff spot, because when you're missing players like Jonas Siegenthaler, Jack Hughes, and Dougie Hamilton, those are key assets to your roster and big blows. The point I'm just trying to make is that Dougie is important for the Devils. Now, should the Devils trade him away? Well, I think you guys already know my answer. No, because I don't think Dougie's the problem with the Devils. Yes, his seasons do get cut short due to injury, but Jack Hughes is in a similar boat, but I don't think anyone's entertaining the thought of trading away Jack Hughes, which, by the way, I'll throw out a fun fact for you. Jack Hughes has a modified no trade clause, but it doesn't kick in until the 2026-2027 season. Theoretically, the Devils can trade him away with no consequence, but obviously that's not going to happen. I think Dougie is very important for the Devils, and I don't see Tom Fitzgerald trying to move him. And even if Fitzy wanted to move him, you can't. You don't really have much leverage because Dougie Hamilton has a no movement clause. Shocker, because so many players on the Devils have no movement clauses or no trade clauses. Dougie Hamilton will leave the Devils when Dougie Hamilton wants to leave the Devils. Whether you like it or not, Dougie is here to stay. So looking at it from both sides, I do not want to trade Dougie Hamilton. But on the other side of that, if I did want to get rid of Dougie Hamilton, I don't think the Devils are able to do so because of his no movement clause. And I get it. A player can waive a no movement clause. I think a good proof of that is the New York Rangers, because Jacob Trouba waived his no trade clause in order to be dealt to the Anaheim Ducks, and JT Miller, he waived his respective no trade clause in order to be dealt to the Rangers from the Canucks, but I don't see that happening for the Devils. But I will say this. I do believe that the Devils need to get rid of a big-time contract just so they can have some extra money to work with. I think there are too many players that have long-term deals with no movement clauses or no trade clauses, but it's not easy because I don't see any reason why Dougie Hamilton would waive his no movement clause, and you can't buy him out. That's not an option. So Dougie Hamilton stays on the Devils roster, and I would like the Devils to get rid of Andre Palat's contract, but similar circumstance to Dougie, he has a no movement clause. I don't think he's going to waive it. and buying him out is not an option. Dougie Hamilton is here to stay, and I think he is a good player for the Devils. The downside for him is, yes, his defense is not good, but he can make up for it offensively, and he is a bit of an injury prone. I don't think that's a Dougie Hamilton problem. I think that's just a team issue. The Devils just deal with injuries. They dealt with a lot of injuries last year. That's what derailed their season. I don't think it's fair to make Dougie Hamilton the poster child for the Devils' injuries. Final conclusion before we move on. Dougie Hamilton is here to stay, whether you like it or not. Okay, we're going to hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe, but before we continue, my colleague Ross, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Senators, has an important message to share from Bear Mattress. Take a listen.
Did you know getting a good night's sleep is the #1 recipe for long-term success in life? I didn't. It took me way longer to realize than I'd like to admit. It was years of tossing and turning. I was always tired. I never felt like I could live up to my potential, but not anymore. Thanks to Bear Mattress. I used their sleep quiz and I matched with the Elite Hybrid. It's perfect for side sleepers like me. Now I wake up energized. I'm getting deeper sleeps and I'm ready to attack the day. No matter how you sleep, Bear Mattress has a match for you with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
Okay, let's hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe at a recent Devils practice. Take a listen.
Obviously, 3 forwards missing today. Do you have sort of an update on them, or just maintenance?
It's just, got bumps and bruises that are sort of piling up a little bit. But also you're thinking of making some lineup changes too, so it's a chance to combine some changes with some rest and all that. But we'll see exactly where we're at tomorrow and solidify our lineup based on that and based on any changes that I might want to make.
One of the things, just talking to some of the guys, was sort of remembering what happened in the last game against Calgary. Obviously, it was, rough what happened with Bass. But I'm just wondering, where is sort of that fine line of not wanting things to potentially get out of control?
It hasn't entered my mind. I mean, we got a lot at stake here right now, as is the opposition, and our focus is to get our game right and get our 2 points. Right,
and that's sort of what I was alluding to, is just how dialed in you have to be to that, especially with this 3-game homestand coming up.
Yeah, we're in the final stretch here. We've been talking about it as a team for a couple of weeks here now, or certainly since the trade deadline passed. We've got to have a singular focus, in terms of how we play, how we prepare, and just really knowing what's at stake and having our mindset meet that moment. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. I would say, aside from the Pittsburgh game, that's the one that we'd like to have back. The others have been a pretty good representation of what we want to look like. Even the other night, the third period, the way that it goes, it's not because of lack of effort or urgency and competitiveness. In fact, if anything, I thought maybe the guys are trying a little too hard. They're playing from the drop of the puck in the third period, like we're playing our final game of the season, and it's all the playing for all the marbles. It's just relax and play. We've been a very good team in the third period, as a team, going into the third period with leads. We've done a very nice job all season. So to me, it was just trying a little bit too hard in that time, and not focused enough on the things that matter. And that's really been the focus for our team for all 3 periods, is to focus on and play our game, have a singular focus and mindset, and go out and execute.
Okay, a few key takeaways from that soundbite. The first being, if you're curious, Andre Palat, Tomas Tatar, and Curtis Lazar were not accounted for at the Devils' recent practice. And Sheldon Keefe mentioned that he might make changes to the lineup. Andre Palat, I don't think he's coming out of the lineup. I think he meant Tomas Tatar and Curtis Lazar because they've been scratched before. If there is a bright side to all the injuries that the Devils have been dealing with, it has forced Keefe to make some changes to spread out the offense a little bit more. I mentioned it in a recent episode. Jesper Bratt, in the previous game against the Blue Jackets, he was on the third line, and his line mates were Eric Haula and Cody Glass. Or in a few recent games, we saw Paul Cotter be scratched. We saw Eric Haula be scratched. I'm liking this from Sheldon Keefe. And the one thing that I can say about Lindy Ruff, the previous coach for the Devils, was that he was never afraid to mix things up or scratch certain players. I remember he scratched Damon Severson after Severson made a big mistake that costed the Devils. That's one of the things I can respect about Lindy Ruff, and I think a lot of the Devils discourse could also respect that from Lindy. I get it, sore subject, but moving on. Sheldon Keefe being forced to make some lineup changes, I kind of like it, and I did like the teamwork that Cody Glass and Jesper Bratt showcased in the game against the Blue Jackets. I think those two worked really well with one another, and both of them walked away with points. Eric Haula is Eric Haula, not really having a good year, not trying to bash on him, just saying he's not really having a good year, and I think he can even attest to that. But going from lineups, let's talk about the Devils' next upcoming game against the Calgary Flames. Including this game, the Devils' next few games are slated to take place at The Rock, and I think they can definitely use some good home cooking. And Sheldon Keefe mentioned the battle that we saw a few months ago that took place between Ryan Lomberg and Nathan Bastian. If you need a reminder, Lomberg basically bashed Nathan's chin in. And I know, bad joke. That's why I'm not a stand-up comedian. But long story short version, Nathan Bastian did have to go onto the IR. He suffered a broken jaw, and you might see some vengeance. Could Curtis McDermott draw into the lineup? I really don't think so, because Nathan Bastian was just trying to fight Lomberg. Unfortunately, he just lost that battle. But you have to keep your emotions in check this time around, because the Devils can't afford to go on a losing streak. I'm not saying that they have to win the rest of the way, but I've been saying it time and time again on this show that I want the Devils to finish third in the Metro. I don't think they're going to surpass the Hurricanes, and they're certainly not surpassing the Capitals for the top spot in the Metro. So I think the Devils are going to have to settle for third place, and I think that's the best case scenario for them. I don't want them in the midst of that wild card race, because, say it with me, that wild card race is wild. And you know what? Pun intended. They call it the wild card for a reason. It's so many teams battling for that second spot. I think the Senators are going to finish first in the wild card, so they're going to lock themselves into the playoffs if all continues to go well for them. But that second spot, it's still wide open. It depends on who can get hot at the right possible time. A team like the Blue Jackets, as I'm recording this episode, they still are on their 4-game losing streak. We'll see what happens. But yeah, keeping your emotions in check. And speaking of which, I found it interesting that Sheldon Keefe said that his team was playing a little too hard in the previous game against the Blue Jackets, because we saw that third period in which Jake Allen single-handedly gave the Devils a win, because the Blue Jackets were on the doorstep and they were knocking on the door really, really hard. They were trying to kick it in, but Jake Allen said no. It was an ugly victory, but an A-plus performance from Jake the Snake. And this goes back to channeling your emotions and using it for good, because I know there's a lot of pressure on the Devils, because if they fall out of the playoff picture, then it's going to be one of the biggest falls from grace that we've seen in recent time, because the Devils were in a comfortable playoff position around Christmas time, and then they were slumping, they were inconsistent the next few months, and seems like they're starting to get into the win column a little more consistently. They've won 4 of their last 5 games, but there's definitely a lot of pressure. And with Jack Hughes, Jonas Siegenthaler, and Dougie Hamilton set to miss the remainder of the season, it definitely doesn't make things any easier. But I would prefer if the Devils play too hard, because that shows that they do care, but it's just about channeling that emotion and just using it for good. Because I think it's perfectly normal to feel nervous. That means you care. But what differentiates certain athletes is like, can they use their nerves to elevate their game, or are they going to crack under the pressure? When it comes to being nervous, perfectly normal, but just make sure you channel it. And the Devils are still in a comfortable position. They just can't afford to go on a losing streak, finish 6-7 or 7-6 to close out the season. And if you're in a hard fought game, send it into OT so you can walk away with something, because every point is crucial. All right, before we talk about Four Nations and the possibility of it returning, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. March Madness is here, baby! And FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. You best believe that I got a few laptops open watching all the games as I slowly start to see my brackets get busted and busted and busted. But that's beside the point. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. And please remember to always gamble responsibly. Okay, as you guys know, last month I had the incredible honor of covering Four Nations. I was inside TD Garden, up in the press box, watching the rest of the tournament, got to go to a lot of media availabilities, redeemed myself with Connor McDavid. It was just an incredible experience. And I've said it before on this show that if the NHL knows what's good for them, they got to get rid of the All-Star game, and they got to try to do something like this in the near future, because I think this shattered a lot of people's expectations. And I was just like, everyone wants to represent their country. Everybody has so much pride representing their flag, and you don't want to put on a bad performance for your country. That's not very patriotic of you. It gives the players some extra fuel and extra motivation to go out there and actually play a competitive hockey game. The All-Star game has been too much of a gimmick, and at this point, someone would just rather take the title of being named All-Star than actually play in the All-Star game, because it's kind of become a joke. And you need some proof. Look at the NBA. Their new All-Star game format, it flopped. And according to ESPN, following the runaway success of last month's Four Nations face-off, which replaced the NHL's traditional All-Star game, the league is prepared to roll out something entirely different again in February 2026. And right now, the schedule still says that the NHL will be going to UBS Arena for the All-Star game, but I'm sure Gary Bettman and a lot of people in the NHL came together and said, we might have to do something different. Now, I asked Connor McDavid his thoughts on Four Nations and the possibility of it returning. I played that soundbite last month, but I'll play it again for you guys. Take a listen. It has been a big success, and I know this is in preparation for next year's Winter Olympics. Is this something you would like to see the NHL bring back in the future at some point, maybe in replacement of an All-Star game?
I'd love to see all countries represented. And it's great that it's best on best, and it's, Four Nations and stuff like that. It's been really, really exciting, but there's some great players sitting at home. And if we want it to be the biggest stage in the world, then you need everybody involved. So I think the league announced something about a World Cup. That's really exciting. I'm not sure you could do this every single year. It's been pretty taxing, obviously, to see you guys going down, getting hurt. but it goes to show that how much guys care about playing for their country, how much pride they play with, while they're wearing the jersey. So I think with the Olympics and the offset of the World Cup, I think we'll get enough.
I spoke to Pierre LeBrun about this, and basically the NHL does have a plan for how everything is going to work out. So I think they're going to do the All-Star game in 2026. Keep in mind, everything can change. Then obviously that's the Olympics. 2027, you would do the World Cup. 2028 All-Star game, something like that. I would have to look back at the notes, and Pierre LeBrun even told me, like, you can't really do Four Nations every single year because then it's going to lose its charm a little bit. And similar to what McDavid said, it's a little taxing because we've seen some players get injured. Matthew Tkachuk is out for the rest of the regular season. Playoffs are still a question mark, and he didn't really finish off strong at Four Nations, but he was one of the main talking points. I want the NHL to bring back Four Nations, and I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get for saying this, but I would love to see certain players represent their country. So I'm talking McDavid's teammate Leon Draisaitl for Team Germany, David Pastrnak for Team Czechia, and Alexander Ovechkin for Team Russia. You need all those players in that sort of tournament, like McDavid said. There were too many great players sitting at home, but it was still a good event. Don't get me wrong. I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get for saying that, but that's just my personal opinion. And I know that some countries can't roll out like 20 or so NHL talent to represent their country, but I'm sure you can figure out a way to make it happen. You can like get other talent from Czechia to field out the rest of the team, because I think that would make things quite interesting. Or you could get a Team Europe or something like that. You can make adjustments to get more players involved, if you know what I mean. Yes, I know. Some countries can't do what Team USA or Team Canada does, which is just pick out a bunch of players in the NHL, and there you go. You got your team. You can pick or choose. It's like a kid in a candy store. Some countries don't have that luxury, but there's a way around it, and I think you can make adjustments to make it happen. So I am really open to bringing back Four Nations. It was a big-time success, and if the NHL knows what's best for them, they do need to do something like this in the future, but they have said that they're going to do a World Cup and things like that. Really excited. I'm over the All-Star game. It's just titular at this point. No one cares about it. The players don't even care about it. Four Nations, it was trending. You had NHL players talking about it. You had all sorts of media talking about it. You had politicians talking about it because of the pride that was at stake. Just goes to show you how big Four Nations was. And that first game between Team Canada and Team USA, that was like honestly, I hope they make a movie about it, because that was incredible. And then people were trying to compare it to like Miracle on Ice, which was a completely different story. I think people were just pushing a certain agenda, but to each their own. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think about the possibility of Four Nations returning? And also, do you think the Devils should trade away Dougie Hamilton? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Thanks for listening. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.